What is up, everyone on that internet land? This is another edition of Flobo on Netflix. This is the show where I go into the Netflix archives either by myself or with some friends, talk about things, movies to check out, things I recommend, things you should avoid, all of that good stuff. And if you guys love this show, and if you do, thank you so much. On my Patreon page, patreon.com/FloboBoys, I actually do a bonus episode of this show where I break down comedy specials. I'm a comedian as well, so it's really cool to see how comedians big and small and famous and up and coming are making their hay on the Netflix comedy platforms. We'll talk about that. So it's also called Flobo on Netflix. But you're not here about that. You're here about movies. One more time before I get into this. This is a show that's seen all over the world. Thank you so much to those people in Africa and Middle East and Oceania for making this part of your podcasting diet. I know you have many of options, so I thank you. This episode is about Zone 414, sometimes known as Zone 414, Zone 414, City of Robots, the sci-fi piece in the vein of, well, on my notes, I have it as a mix of Blade Runner versus What Happened to Monday, but whatever happened to Monday, but it kind of isn't either of those movies. Just a little more of a backstory. Your boy Flobito. Flobo, I love sci-fi. In fact, one of our sister shows, Commander's Log, is the unofficial home for Star Trek Discovery Talk. I love space stuff. I love things that are just beyond our present and future. So when Netflix said, hey, look, we have a sci-fi movie, again, that's on the shorter side, I jumped at the chance because, frankly, I like having shorter films. I'm about that life. So yeah, that's kind of the backstory. So I had like very, very low expectations going in. And of course, in preparation for the show, I broke out the notepad. I took a look at the ratings. Rotten Tomatoes has a certified rotten at 17%. IMDb has a 4.9 out of 10, which is interesting, because usually I use Rotten Tomatoes as more of my inflated score and IMDb as my conservative score. But this one is kind of a flip. Stars Guy Pearce has such a interesting career. I don't want to say checkered because that kind of implies a bad thing, but his has some hits. I remember Memento, some misses, some movies I don't remember, and there's some movies that didn't do well, but I remember liking, like Lockout. Right, that was kind of a movie. I thought it was a pretty fun movie in the whole Europa Corp era of those over-the-top action pieces. But in this one, Guy Pearce plays David Carmichael, a more of a subdued guy with a very staged New York accent. Like, it's a New York accent people who are making impressions and fun of New Yorkers make, an actual New York accent, to say the least, where he's trying to investigate in this world where androids and humans coexist. And there's only really one section where they're allowed to coexist freely, and that is Zone 414, which is where the name of the movie comes from. And so he's unraveling this mystery. And I don't want to get too much into details because I don't want to spoil it. You're kind of like on board with it. But even at a film with 100 minutes, that's an hour and 35 minutes, 39 minutes, I think, without credits, it kind of drags. It's a very slow-paced movie looking for the emotional dichotomy of what it means to be an android with feelings versus a human being who's detached of feelings, and how we're basically two ships passing in a sailing night. I guess that was the intent, at least from the script stage. But what comes across on stage, on the screen, is this things happening at a very, very slow pace. So it's about Jane. Jane's an android who is feeling threatened for her life, if you can imagine that. An android life thinks she's going to be killed. It's played by Matilda Anna Ingrid Lutz, which did very, very well, I thought, from all the different portrayals of artificial life we've seen, especially post Y2K. Jane does give us a nuanced performance of someone who is a little less than human, but has the emotional range as if a android or robot ramped up and gained sentience. So it was kind of fun to see a fresh take on that. I think that's something you can pull from, which was pretty cool. And that's why I had like a very the whatever ever happened to Monday, which is also Netflix original vibes about having this actress having this range, whereas in that movie, whatever happened to Monday, there's like 7 different interpretations of that character. The two-hander, as they call it, the main two characters, Jane, the potential victim, and then you have Dave Carmichael, played by Guy Pearce, being the investigator. We've seen this kind of dualism before in film noir type pieces. So all that stuff is pretty much well-worn territory. And I think that is ultimately the undoing of Zone 414. Is it a bad movie? No. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that Saturday afternoon. It is overcast, that it's kind of warm. It may rain or just finished raining. You still have the whole afternoon ahead of you, but you don't feel like going out to the beach or do anything sunny because you're like, well, I'm kind of in, but not quite a dreary day kind of vibe. You flick it on, turn your brain off on the couch. But ultimately, even though there are some elements of freshness, there's some elements in Jane's character or in Jane's portrayal, or I should say Matilda's portrayal of Jane. Also, we've seen every single aspect of this film elsewhere. The score, elsewhere. The main guy, elsewhere. The whole idea of androids and humans coexisting, elsewhere. It kind of makes you go, okay, this is a movie that belongs somewhere in the mix, but doesn't really excel at anything. And ultimately, it comes down to what you want to consume the movie for. If you want to have something on while you're lounging, if you want to have something playing, if you own a shop downtown, something has decent enough visuals to draw in some lookers for 5 or 10 minutes, perfect. I'm with IMDb here, 5 out of 10. But if you're actually sitting at the edge of your seat waiting for an unraveling story about the true nature of man, Rotten Tomatoes got it right, 17%. For me, I'm going to be a bit more on the IMDb side. I'll give it an even 5. I finished it. I didn't turn it off. I didn't walk away. I guess that matters on some level, but ultimately, it's definitely something you could totally put on, do something else, playing your phone, and know exactly what's going on in there. I actually have in my notes the perfect Saturday afternoon overcast B movie, maybe even a C movie. And here I also have a section called Lame Parts before I get out of here. Not to bury the film. The costuming was kind of flat. I thought it was kind of weird. That one scene where you had the buyer of different kind of androids, and I was like, oh, I get it. There's supposed to be different kind of models, and he was trying to see whether he wants a female android or a genoid or a male android or an android. I was like, this could have been a lot better, but the palette was fine. Very, very small gripe on a film that has its own flaws, so I'm not going to pile on. So yes, 5 out of 10. Check it out passively. Don't actively watch it. There are a lot worse films out there. That does it for me on this edition of Flobo Saw on Netflix. I'll be back with more episodes. And if you're watching or listening to this, drop a like, drop a follow, 5 stars in the podcast version. I appreciate you. Appreciate each and every one of you, and I appreciate coming back to another edition of Flobo Saw It on Netflix.